The Catholic Echo Podcast is a weekly podcast discussing what's happening now in the Catholic Diocese of Youngstown. Bishop David Bonner and members of our diocesan community discuss your burning spiritual questions. The Catholic Echo Podcast is produced by the Communications Department of the Diocese of Youngstown with support from the Annual Diocesan Appeal. It can be found on catholicecho.org, Facebook, and YouTube. Your host is Dennis Biviano.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Echo Podcast. Today we are discussing the lessons from Archbishop Fulton Sheen, an American Catholic priest who served as Bishop of Rochester from 1956 to 1969, and of course a prominent figure on the early days of television, widely regarded as America's first televangelist. Of course, his Life is Worth Living segments, so many of those topics are still relevant today, decades later. Joining our conversation is Father Jim Korda, host of Wineskins and the Gabriel Award winner for his lifetime of work in Catholic media on television and radio. Thanks so much for joining us.
Dennis, my pleasure.
Now, Father Korda, what are some of your earliest memories of Fulton Sheen, and did you draw inspiration from him on your work as president, producer, host of the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown?
Well, as you had noted earlier, he probably was in the early 50s doing his show Life is Worth Living. I wasn't born until 1953, so the shows that I would have experienced would have been on reruns. And as a matter of fact, when I was in charge of the radio and television for the diocese, we would rerun his show Life is Worth Living. And so I think there's a timelessness that was part of his legacy, that the shows that he produced and broadcast in the early 50s were relevant today for us in the 21st century.
What do you think made Fulton Sheen such an excellent communicator?
I think he did a combination of pizzazz and enthusiasm, but also sound Christian doctrine. And that was what he talked about. He talked about Catholicism, but he also broadened it and talked about Christian values. And so I think combination of really Hollywood and basic moral values was what he was all about.
And he introduced using the chalkboard.
Exactly.
Something you still see even politicians use today on television.
Sure.
And mixing in humor from time to time. How important was it? Not that he came off abrasive, but he came off serious sometimes. But he did have that humor.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because historically his show was on opposite of Milton Berle, who was a big gagster. And so from time to time they would kind of go back and forth knowing that they were competing with the same audience at the same time. And so having some levity and some jokes from time to time really gave the folks in the audience something not only to chuckle about, but also gave them a reason to tune in. Because, let's face it, sometimes the doctrines of the Christian faith are so deep and heavy that you need a little levity and a little excitement in order to make it alive.
Are there any particular talks, maybe specific shows, writings, or quotes of Fulton Sheen that have stood out to you personally?
I think one that he's most noted for is he always said to people, remember to love people and to use things rather than to use people and love things.
Wow.
Very simple and yet very profound. I always remember that.
Now, you lived through many changes in the Catholic Church. I guess, to your knowledge, how did he adapt and embrace that change?
Well, he was part of the Vatican Council. He would have been to all of the council meetings and the gatherings, along with our own Bishop Malone of happy memory here, who was one of the youngest bishops at the time. And so I think those young bishops brought back to their diocese this transformation, this reform, and this opening up the windows of the Catholic Church and letting this fresh air in, because they were energized by what was going on at the council, that they had to bring that back to their people. And so that was certainly witnessed here in the diocese with Bishop Malone, and I'm sure with Archbishop Fulton Sheen when he was serving the people of Rochester.
And it's funny, YouTube era is just about 20 years old now, and, many of his old videos have been uploaded to YouTube. His teachings are there for everyone to see. I guess, isn't that important to appeal to new generations?
I think it is. We as Catholic Christians, I think, need to have one foot firmly planted on the ground and another foot in the air moving. And I think that's the temperament of moderate Catholicism, is that we have to have our foot firmly planted in tradition and the doctrines of the faith, and yet that other foot moving us forward, edging us forward, embracing new ideas. And I think that's just what he was about. That's the bishops that I've experienced in my priesthood, and I think that's what we should be about as well.
Now, in 2012, our Archbishop Fulton Sheen was given the designation of Venerable. For our listeners, what does that mean specifically, and what are your thoughts on the cause for his canonization?
Well, obviously, when they're given the title of Venerable, they're opening up their cause for beatification and canonization. And so he's venerable, he's blessed as a servant of God, he's recognized for his Catholic teaching and sharing that faith, but also for his own personal life and witness to the church and to God. That cause has been kind of put on hold for now because of some discussion between the Diocese of Peoria, Illinois, and the Archdiocese of New York. Hopefully that down the road gets settled, and then the cause of Fulton Sheen, which I think among many people is still alive.
Did you know in 1952, Fulton Sheen won an Emmy Award for Most Outstanding Television Personality, beating out Lucille Ball?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm a little jealous because he won an Emmy and I never won an Emmy. But I think it's wonderful because he was recognized by his peers for what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And the people in the television and radio industry knew him well because they were all peers. They were all the same. And they had a message to get out. And that's the wonder of television and radio, is that we have a message, we have a vehicle to use to get that message out. And he used it wonderfully. And I think that televangelism continues today, but we do that more, at least in our diocese, through social media, which is another great way to get the word out and to spread the gospel of
Absolutely.
the Lord.
Now, he also was known as spending an hour in front of the Blessed Sacrament each day. I guess, how did he provide inspiration for priests and those in religious life?
Well, I think for us as priests, we get so caught up in what we're doing, and we don't take time for ourselves. And I think that's one of the downsides for many of us priests, is that we don't take a day off. We're so busy, we're stretched. Many priests nowadays, especially our younger priests, have a variety of assignments, and so they're pulled in different directions. We need to take time for ourselves, for prayer, for meditation, for socialization, just downtime. And I think that's a wonderful way that Fulton Sheen was able to spend that downtime in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And I know many young people today find encouragement in their prayerful spiritual support by doing that as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Father Jim Korda, for your time and perspective.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up, after a short break, you'll hear from Diocese of Youngstown Chancellor Joan Lawson. Much more when the Catholic Echo podcast returns. It's time for Patron Saints of the Diocese of Youngstown with your Bishop, David J. Bonner.
St. Thomas Aquinas was a Dominican priest and scholar in the 13th century whose writings on philosophy, logic, and theology, such as the Summa Theologica, are taught in all Catholic seminaries. St. Thomas Aquinas is a patron saint of Catholic universities, colleges, and schools, and St. Thomas Aquinas Middle and High School in Louisville. His feast day is January 28th. So happy feast of St. Thomas Aquinas to our friends in Louisville and our brothers of the Dominican Order of Preachers in Youngstown. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us.
Wondering what happened to timely Catholic news in the Diocese of Youngstown? It's at catholicecho.org. There you'll find recent stories about Catholic life in all 6 counties of the Diocese of Youngstown, plus recent videos, podcasts, and even national and global news. You'll find it all at catholicecho.org. Sign up for the email newsletter while you're there to have Catholic news delivered to your inbox.
When storms hit, we are there to rebuild. As our neighbors age, we lighten their burdens. As our veterans adjust, we ease their transitions. In every part of the country, we are there. We are Catholic Charities. We serve millions each year regardless of their faith. We put food back on tables, unlock doors, and walk together on the road back. Help Catholic Charities serve your neighbors in need. Join us at wearethere.us.
Did you know that the Catholic Echo magazine is delivered 10 times per year to 52,000 Catholic households in northeastern Ohio? That's more than 150,000 people. And the Catholic Echo website, catholicecho.org, has been averaging 30,000 views per month since it launched in February 2023. Advertise your business, special event, or service with the Catholic Echo in print or online. Email catholicecho@youngstowndiocese.org. Advertising discounts are available for Catholic institutions as well as for businesses that commit to 5 or 10 issues in a year. Email catholicecho@youngstowndiocese.org or visit the advertising tab at catholicecho.org for more information.
Hello and welcome back to the Catholic Echo podcast. Always great to be joined by Diocese of Youngstown Chancellor and Archivist Joan Lawson to continue our discussion on the life and times of Venerable Fulton Sheen. Thanks for joining us, Joan.
It's great to be here with you. Thank you.
I know you've researched Fulton Sheen for several weeks now. What can you tell us about his ties to the Diocese of Youngstown and, in particular, the Mahoning Valley?
Well, his ties to the Mahoning Valley go back even farther than the existence of the Diocese of Youngstown, when our 6 counties still belonged to the Diocese of Cleveland. In the 1930s, the St. Patrick's of Youngstown Study Club brought Monsignor, at that time, before he was made bishop, Monsignor Fulton Sheen, to Stamp Auditorium, which is a big, beautiful venue. So we knew he was drawing crowds. So he came in 1935 for the St. Patrick's Study Club. In 1936, he came for the Youngstown Deanery, which is Youngstown and Canton were deaneries of the Diocese of Cleveland. But the National Council of Catholic Women, the Youngstown Deanery, brought him back to the Mahoning Valley. And in 1940, a crowd of more than 1,000 went to see him in Warren in Trumbull County. And at that point, he talked about how hatred and persecution that he would have been looking at in Europe was affecting civilization. He called it mass selfishness. So he was preaching against a philosophy of hate and a policy of persecution. And he said that those hateful actions will crack and perish, that mass selfishness will crack and perish because it's not sustainable. Then after we became a diocese, the Youngstown Council of the Knights of Columbus brought him again back to Stamp Auditorium. In 1947, the Chesterton Club, which was a lay group that used education to keep other lay people living a joyful, holy life, brought him again to Stamp Auditorium. 2,400 people came to see him. And the really interesting thing about that is that they moved a Catholic football game that was between Ursuline High School and Steubenville Central Catholic. They moved it from 7:30 to 6:30 because it's still Monsignor Fulton Sheen was coming to town, and so they even moved a football game. So it was a big deal when he would come. He came again in the late 40s. He came in the 50s. The mayors of Mahoning Valley towns and cities, Campbell Struthers, Niles, Louisville, Girard, Youngstown, McDonald, proclaimed Bishop Fulton J. Sheen Day. He came and celebrated. He was by ritual. He would celebrate in the Byzantine Rite. And so at that point, he visited 5 Byzantine Rite churches and presided at a pontifical mass. So people turned out by the thousands in this area to see him.
Wow, that's fascinating. All before the advent of television at that point. Maybe at the very end, that was the beginnings of his Life is Worth Living segment. Were you able to find any documents or letters or any opinion pieces?
Well, that's the interesting thing. We are a bit low on documentation. Everything I told you was from newspaper clippings, and it was from the Youngstown Deanery and then from the Youngstown area. So if people in Canton know anything about it or have any clippings about it, because I would be surprised if he didn't didn't go to Canton, but I just couldn't find the documentation on it. So if anybody knows anything about that, I'd love to hear from them. They could email me at jlawson@youngstowndiocese.org.
Thank you, Joan, for all your research on that. Now, you told me a couple of weeks ago that your mom used to speak about Fulton Sheen when you were growing up. What were you able to discover about him through his videos on YouTube preaching and his writings?
Well, my mom talked about him in terms of how powerful he was as a preacher. And he was extremely popular. In the mid-1950s, he was the third most admired man in America. So that means by both Catholics and those who weren't, he was admired. He was highly educated himself, and he was able to communicate theology and philosophy in ways that people didn't need a college education to understand. And when he died, there was a summary about him that said he combined the head and the heart. And I think that people were able to see that, so that they were very compelled by him. I also thought it was kind of interesting looking at the videos that he would write on a chalkboard. And I think that now we'll put a graphic up, but he knew that people needed to look at something as well as listen to something at the same time. So I thought that was pretty interesting. He really knew how people learned and came to understand things.
And really the messaging, I mean, so many topics 6 decades later, when he first started on TV, very relevant to this day. I guess what makes Fulton Sheen's legacy enduring in the church?
I'm certainly no expert on him, having only just started to look at him, but I think his relevance today would be that we need to combine the head and the heart, and we need both. We need true knowledge and we need true understanding. And to meet people where they are and to recognize that we're all in this together, I think he gave that feeling that we're in this together. He shined the light of the Gospels into places where hatred had taken hold, where loneliness is, where anxiety and worry are. And so I think that that's a lesson for us today. Learn where people are, learn where their worries are, and find out where we can bring a light to that.
Thank you, Joan. Shifting gears a little bit, I also wanted to ask you your thoughts on the legacy of Pope Francis, who we lost in late April.
Yes. I think future historians will be able to tell a lot just by looking at his name. The name he took that no other pope had taken, the name of Francis, on Francis of Assisi. He cared for creation. He was a peacemaker. He never forgot the poor, but he didn't see the poor as objects of our charity, but as people of dignity, as companions on our journey. He was among those who suffered from violence, by those who were displaced by violence and war, visited those who were imprisoned, washed their feet. He wrote about joy. He wrote the joy of the gospel, but he also showed it. He radiated it. So I think he will be remembered in the future as a man who lived what he preached. He was an authentically holy man and a great gift to the church.
And finally, can you give us an update on the archive facility on the former St. Cyril and Methodius Church Youngstown property? What have you and Hannah been working on to help prepare for this?
We continue to do the services that people ask us for. We do lots of research for people who are looking for their sacramental records, and usually they call us when they don't know where they were baptized or were confirmed, and so we do a lot of research for that. We do research for the bishop continually on histories of our parishes and our organizations. We continue to take in new materials as more people are becoming aware of our interest in the past. They're donating things like class pictures from Catholic schools, or we recently got a ticket from when Mother Teresa visited Canton. We're taking in people's parish history books and parish cookbooks. So we're continuing with what it is that we exist for, and then we're also working on finalizing the construction plans for that new site at the St. Cyril and Methodius campus, how we will adapt that magnificent church for use for public programming, and then how we're using the rest of that little campus there downtown for building our new facility that will be perfect temperature and humidity conditions for our collections so that they're preserved for generations to come, preserved into perpetuity.
And fingers crossed on a groundbreaking pretty soon.
Fingers crossed on a groundbreaking pretty soon. And this time next year, I hope to be talking to you from our new facility.
That's excellent. Joan, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to what the coming months hold for the Archive Project. That is all for this week's episode of the Catholic Echo podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, CatholicEcho.org, or your favorite podcasting platform. I'm your host, Dennis Biviano. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed week.
The Catholic Echo podcast is a production of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Youngstown. Your host has been Dennis Biviano. Have a blessed day, and may God be with you.